are talking Little Red Riding Hood from 2016. Now, you may have heard the name Rennie Perez on this channel if you've watched any of my kind of B-movie reviews before. He is a prolific B-movie producer that mainly produces kind of action, horror, and a little bit of fantasy. He's kind of one of these directors which has one shtick, and in some ways I've quite enjoyed his work. I think he has quite a visual eye, but his movies are a little lacking in narrative and dialogue and things like that, so he's some of a guilty pleasure. This is a movie from him, and he's directed, edited, produced, and it stars a number of Rennie Perez regulars, Alana Forte, Robert Amsler, for example, and is a broad retelling of the obviously the Grimm fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood story. So this movie focuses on, well, Little Red Riding Hood as she is travelling through the forest to see her grandmother. She is warned off going in a particular direction by this kind of undead knight. But she does go there, and inevitably gets kind of chased by a werewolf into this kind of large castle where she ends up getting trapped by some type of magical barrier. And this castle is home to this kind of ancient deity kind of being who is seemingly feeding off fear and traps people in his castle to effectively feast on their fears. A little while later, she's joined by a kind of wandering barbarian played by Robert Amsler, and we actually get, for some reason, a scene in kind of modern America where we have a kind of photographer in the wild finding this kind of demonic lord again in a nice kind of gothic mansion, whatever. Anyway, let's talk about it. What works in this movie's favour? Now, one thing that is consistent with Rennie Perez movies is he always tends to film them in the same place. You'll notice this kind of stretch of woodland and countryside crops up in every single one of his movies, but with good reason. I mean, it's very cinematic, it's very scenic, and Rennie Perez's kind of visual style is he always kind of films in quite bright sunlight, so it's kind of like, it gives it this kind of very much a kind of Mediterranean feel in some ways. I mean, this movie I would liken to the likes of Ator in some respects. Kind of light on story, but it has somewhat of a kind of goofy charm in some ways, a little bit like kind of Ator. But yeah, it has this quite unique kind of visual style. Now, along with that, I think there are some elements here that, visually speaking, are quite interesting. You know, we have this kind of undead knight. You know, he's got this kind of dilapidated face and his armour, and like, with this demon king, he's got like fingers coming out of his head, and there's some cool-looking monsters. I mean, they're filmed in, again, very bright light, so I think it kind of they look like costumes rather than real kind of beings. But had they kind of been, you know, filmed with a little bit more of that in mind, it would have been perfectly acceptable. But there's lots of kind of quite fun, like monsters and kind of creatures here. There's like a guy who's like a creature that's blind, and he's holding this kind of eyeball, and that's how he sees, and things like this. There's a kind of a witch who's like all kind of like she's got a severe burns, but she can transform into Alana Forte, basically. So there's kind of some fun monsters and stuff on display here, and like I said, cinematography wise, it looks great. So there's elements here that I think Rennie Perez is quite consistent on in his movies, and kind of looks kind of quite well. Lots of sexy women in this movie. Okay, but this movie really is just visual. And that's it. There's nothing else on the bones of this one. I mean, there's nearly no story here. Let me go into a little bit more detail. So, you know, we get the Little Red Riding Hood ends up in this castle, and then she's just wandering around. Now, I kid you not, this movie, literally, we see this kind of demon king who doesn't speak, he only kind of growls, and we see like a 10-minute sequence of him kind of sitting down, looking around. He gets up, we follow him walking through all these corridors, down some stairs, you know, into some sort of dungeon, and it's just like, yeah, he's walking at just a regular walking pace. He opens this kind of like cell door and something comes out, and then we see the character go back upstairs. He's walking back upstairs. I'm not kidding you. That's what it is. That's what this movie is. It almost feels like Rennie Perez has just filmed a bunch of scenes, and then thought, let's kind of make this is a good location. Let's kind of make this a movie around it. I mean, it looks like they've shot in some type of like actual kind of like medieval castle looking building, which, you know, I like that sort of stuff, like the actual on location photography. It looks great, but it's just there's no story to it. And then we have effectively Little Red Riding Hood just kind of wandering around this castle. Eventually she meets this kind of barbarian. They're both dubbed in quite awful like overdubbing, and then you'll see even sequences where they'll talk and they haven't actually overdubbed the lines. Robert Amsler's Austrian, and he really doesn't have a huge grasp of the English language, so it's kind of like they've dubbed him in this kind of strong, manly voice like this, you know, but the guy can't really speak English. That's why he doesn't have a lot of lines in any of these kind of Rennie Perez movies. But it's just done so poorly. And then let's talk about some of the other technical elements here. The one, Rennie Perez did the editing for this movie, and it's so badly done. Like the transitions from one scene to another, like you'll have like some music playing in a scene with Little Red Riding Hood, and it'll hard cut to a scene from shows this kind of Demon King or whatever he is, and the music will just like instantly change to something else, and you'll have like his theme running for like a few seconds while he's doing something, and then it will change back to the kind of like the Little Red Riding Hood theme that kind of starts again, and it's just repetitive and repetitive. The songs are awful. So effectively it's just kind of people wandering around this castle, really seemingly doing not very much at all. And then we have to talk about the kind of flash forward sections, which are completely superfluous. Now, I said the same thing about another movie I reviewed from Rennie Perez, where I think what's happened is they've probably just needed to add plus the running time. But they didn't have the location or the kind of the costumes or something, so they've just filmed scenes in like modern times as a kind of like a parallel, but it doesn't have any effect on the story whatsoever. It doesn't go anywhere. Completely pointless. I suspect just to kind of add another element to it or pad out the running time. And as I've said, like, you know, as much as I quite like Rennie Perez's kind of style of filming in this kind of like open woodland area and kind of countryside, it's all bright light. I mean, it really does make what otherwise I think would have been perfectly acceptable creature costumes into like they look like costumes, you know, they kind of look like rubber masks. And I think had they been filmed in a little bit more shadow, in the dusk, something like that, you could have got away with it, and it looked a lot better. I still kind of like them, to be fair, but they're just not looking their best in like bright sunlight. And then there's very little dialogue in this movie, and there's actresses like Alana Forti, who I know is American and can speak, you know, fine English, but for some reason there's like no lines. It's just this kind of music playing, so it's a very boring film. I mean, visually, like I said, if you look at clips of this or screenshots, it doesn't look too bad. But just imagine a whole movie of that with not really much going on, not really any dialogue, repetitive music, and kind of scenes which really don't amount to much at all. So, yeah, visual style for Perez, definitely, but man, he just needs to kind of like either try a bit harder with the kind of the story, or have like someone else's script or a producer or something. Anyway, 3 out of 10 for this one. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.